Men and women practice head coverings differently to reflect different hair lengths given by God. 1 Corinthians 11 verse 13. Judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? So what criteria do we use to judge whether it is proper for women to uncover their heads? What is the criteria? Answer: does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is a disgrace for him? But if a woman has long hair, it is her glory. For her hair is given to her for a shawl. Nature's teaching on male and female hair lengths reveals that it is improper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered. There are three key terms here: nature, is given, covering, or literally shawl, and then we will study all these three terms one at a time. First of all, note the connection between the head covering mentioned in verse 13 and hair mentioned in verse 14 and 15. This is not a new connection. Remember verse 5 and 6? But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. For if a woman will not cover her head, then she should cut her hair short. But since it is disgraceful for a woman to cut her hair short or shave her head, let her cover her head. So there is an analogous relationship between hair and the head covering. Nature teaches that a man wearing long hair disgraces himself, so it is improper for a man to cover his head. Instead, it is proper for a man to uncover his head. Conversely, nature teaches that a woman wearing long hair is glorious, so it is proper for a woman to cover her head, and it is improper for a woman to uncover her head. But what does nature's teaching on male and female hair lengths apply? Do these apply today? Or was it only applicable in previous centuries to those societies with such cultural norms? Now, those who think that this teaching applied only to those cultures claim that the word nature, physis, refers to social customs or cultural norms. So they argue that Paul was teaching Christians to conform to their society's customs and cultural norms. They argue that in the first century society, men tended to keep short hair, women tended to keep long hair, so Christian men must also follow the cultural norm and keep their hair short. And Christian women must keep their hair long, or they will break the cultural norm. So they argue that Paul did not want them to break the cultural norm because in such an honor or shame culture that would be disgraceful. And this is how they apply the passage to us in the 21st century. They argue that in the 21st century, many westernized societies are okay with men having long hair and women having short hair. Therefore, it is okay for Christians to have long hair and Christian women to cut their hair short. After all, they say Paul was just concerned about not breaking a cultural norm. And so a Christian man with long hair or a Christian woman with short hair in our society in the 21st century, this does not break any cultural norm. So they conclude it's okay. But that's because they say the word nature, physis, refers to social customs or cultural norms. However, that is a misinterpretation because it contradicts verse 15b. Let's look at the clarifying verse 15b, which begins with the word for, providing a reason. If a woman has long hair, it is her glory. Why? Because her hair is given to her for a shawl. So woman's long hair is her glory because it is given to her, and the question is, given to her by who? By her society? The verb give is in the perfect passive indicative, and it functions as a divine passive. When used in this form, this verb is used to speak of an action performed by God even without naming God directly. Which means that woman's long hair is given to her by God, not her society. That was not Paul's point. Therefore, the word nature or physis cannot refer to social customs or cultural norms in this passage, because Paul was talking about God-given male and female hair lengths. So let's double confirm this point. Here's a screenshot from the Blue Letter Bible. And you can see the word give in the divine passive is used 6 times in the New Testament and found in 5 verses. We have just looked at 1 Corinthians 11, which contains one of these verses. So let's look at the other 4 verses, which have the word give in this same form. Matthew 13. Then the disciples came and said to him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" And he answered them, "To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom, but to them it has not been given." See, the disciples were given the secrets of the kingdom of heaven. By who? By God, not by the people of that society. The secret of the kingdom was not given to the majority of the people of the society, so clearly they are not in a position to give this secret to the disciples. Only God is. And that's the same point for Mark 4 and Luke 8. The disciples were given the secrets of the kingdom of God, and obviously it was given to them by God and not the people of that society. Last verse that contains this given in this form, Matthew 19. "And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery." This is the ESV version. This verse is not the original, it's the ESV's version. But that's a separate point. You can see this in my work on whether divorce and remarriage is possible. Verse 10, the disciples said to him, "If such is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry." But he said to them, "Not everyone can receive this saying, but only to those to whom it is given." This saying is given to some people, not everyone. And who gave it? Who gave this saying to them? God gave it to them, obviously. So we've seen how the divine passive is given means given by God. God-given. So let's return to 1 Corinthians 11 verse 14 to 15. "Does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is a disgrace for him, but if a woman has long hair, it is her glory, for her hair is given to her." Woman's long hair is glorious because her long hair is God-given. Man short hair, woman long hair, this is a God-given template. Man short hair, woman long hair is not a social custom given by the people living in first century society with first century cultural norms. If the people in the first century had maintained this cultural norm, it was incidental. It is irrelevant to Paul's argument. It was this practice of having long hair for women was not given by the society, according to Paul. It was given by God. So it is disgraceful for a man to wear long hair because he's going against a God-given template. It is glorious for a woman to wear long hair because she is going along with a God-given template. Okay, but for now, I hope Paul's clarification in verse 15b is clear enough. These hair lengths mentioned in verse 14 to 15a were a God-given template. These hair lengths were not based on social customs. If the people in those societies practiced it, that was incidental, not part of Paul's argument. Paul was not saying, Corinthians, so these certain hair lengths are disgraceful because you are going against your first century cultural norms. That's not what Paul meant. Paul was saying, Corinthians, these certain hair lengths are disgraceful because you are going against the hair length that is given to you. By who? Given to you by God. In other words, they are going against a God-given template. Paul was not saying, Corinthians, these certain hair lengths are glorious because you are conforming to the cultural norm. Paul was actually saying, Corinthians, these certain hair lengths are glorious for you, women, long hair, because you are conforming to the hair length given to you by who? By God. You're going along with a God-given template. Since Paul did not teach that male and female hair lengths were based on cultural norms or social customs, the first century cultural norms or social customs were irrelevant when it came to this issue. The interpretation of this passage is not based on what the first century people did. Likewise, our 21st century cultural norms or social customs are also irrelevant to this issue. Whether our culture thinks that men having long hair is okay and women having short hair is okay is utterly irrelevant. The question to ask is, does my hair conform to the God-given template or not? If so, it is glorious. If not, it is disgraceful. In all centuries and in all cultures, Christians are to conform to the God-given template where men have short hair and women has long hair. Now, do you remember why Paul wrote about hair lengths? That was because it was linked to the issue about head coverings. There was an analogous relationship between the hair lengths and head covering. And the final confirmation comes in verse 15b. For her hair is given to her for a shawl. Do you remember I mentioned in an earlier video that when we reach verse 15, we'll triple check to see if we correctly identify what is the covering, whether it was A, a piece of cloth, or B, long hair, or C, hair that is bound up or piled up. You see in verse 15b, the word covering in the ESV's translation for peribolaion is not a clear translation. After all, the word covering does not tell us what it is. Yes, it does tell us that what it does, it covers, but what is it? Peribolaion is used twice in the New Testament, here and in Hebrews 1 verse 12. Like a peribolaion, translated robe, you will roll them up. Like a garment, they will be changed, but you are the same and your years have no end. See, in verse 15b, Paul explicitly drew the connection between hair and a peribolaion, a piece of clothing. Here in verse 15b, we have the final confirmation that in the previous verses, Paul was referring to the act of using a cloth to cover one's head. That's why I said that translating peribolaion as covering is not clear, since it only tells us the function, but not what it is. As it turns out, Paul actually used a word that refers to a piece of cloth, so why not just translate it accordingly to communicate that it is a piece of cloth? The Blue Letter Bible provides 3 English words to translate peribolaion: wrapper, mantle, veil. Wrapper and mantle don't seem like terms we use often enough to understand. And a veil gives the idea of covering head and face, but Paul only spoke of a head covering. So here's a proposed translation that I picked up from a commentator: shawl. This word is modern enough to describe the piece of cloth that people still use today. So I feel that shawl seems the best term to describe the piece of cloth to use as a head covering. Now let's put the pieces of verse 13 to 15 together and conclude. Verse 13, judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? That's a rhetorical question. After all that Paul has written before verse 13, the answer is obviously no, it is not proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered. But what is the proof that it is improper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Verse 14 to 15, does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is disgrace for him, but if a woman has long hair, it is her glory? That's what nature teaches. For, why? For her hair is given to her for a shawl. You see, the apostles' head covering tradition was based on a God-given template of male and female hair lengths. It was not random. This head covering tradition did not just pop out of nowhere. And it was not stolen. It was not an attempt to imitate the surrounding culture. It was not an attempt to conform to the culture of that day. The apostles were thinking, how should we reflect man and woman when they pray and prophesy? What should be the appropriate way to reflect that they are a man and they are a woman? And their basis for the head covering tradition was the hair lengths given by God. God-given template, man is given short hair by God. Long hair is a disgrace to himself. So, the apostles' tradition, it is proper for a man to uncover his head when praying or prophesying. His proper behavior honors Christ, his head. It is improper for a man to cover his head when praying or prophesying. His improper behavior dishonors Christ, his head. The God-given template, woman is given long hair by God. Long hair is her glory. Cutting her hair short or shaving her head is a disgrace to herself. So, the apostles' tradition, it is proper for a woman to cover her head when praying or prophesying. Her proper behavior brings glory to Christian men, her head. It is improper for a woman to uncover her head when praying or prophesying. Her improper behavior dishonors Christian men, her head. In short, men and women practice head coverings differently to reflect different hair lengths given by God. Please watch the next video on verse 16 for the apostles' important conclusion to this issue.